Hi, this is Pastor Steve with an encouraging word. Covenant. Covenant's not a word we use very often except really in terms of marriage. I was thinking about it because recently I performed a wedding for a young couple. Hard to believe, even in the midst of a pandemic, people are still getting married, even as babies are being born. People are moving and even taking new jobs. And of course, there are still the funerals and people dying. All of life still continuing in the midst of a pandemic. But the word covenant, I was thinking, is one we use in relation to marriage, but it's a word God uses in relation to us. In fact, the basis of the marriage covenant comes from God's love for us in Christ. Paul talks about in Ephesians, the 5th chapter. Let me read a few selected verses, starting at verse 28. Husband, love your wives as Christ loved the church, and he gave himself up for her. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one hates their own body, but feeds it, takes care of it, just as Christ does the church. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, Paul says. But he says, I'm speaking of Christ and the church. It's a profound mystery that relationship with God is to be the most important in our lives. Is God's commitment and love to us, sees us as the most important person to him. It's a covenant. Covenant's expressed in those words in the marriage where they say, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others, I'll keep myself only to my spouse. We see that with Jesus, who's faithful and true. But see, when things get worse instead of better, when there's sickness instead of health, when we're poor instead of richer, sometimes we jump ship. Sometimes we turn our backs or walk away or lose our love. God's still faithful, but we're faithless. We're not trusting God. We don't believe because things aren't going our way. But let me remind you, our human perspective is pretty limited. Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount said that God makes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. Rain in the desert community is always a sign of blessing, so God blesses those who are his followers and even those who aren't. If you take the other side of rain, as we often do when it's pouring, trouble so great that rain falling sometimes seems difficult, then we have difficulties even as people who don't follow Jesus do. It's confusing at times. We want to all be better, richer, health. But then problems come and difficulties arise, and we sometimes falter in our walk with God. But our perspective is so limited. Think of the story I heard of the old man who had a grandson. The son had passed away, and he had the grandson helping them on the farm. He was 18 years of age, and the villagers came and said, we heard the army's going to force him into service. It's a terrible thing to happen, to lose your grandson. The old man said, good or bad, I'm not really sure, but God knows. Well, sure enough, the grandson was forced into service and was put into the cavalry. Well, the villagers came back and said, it's a great thing. He's in the cavalry. He's not down in the trenches, in the fighting hand to hand. He's above it all on the horses. Again, the grandfather replied, good or bad, I'm not too sure, but God knows. A word came that the grandson fell, broke his leg because of riding the horse, fell from the height. Again, the villagers came to the farm and came to the old man and said, oh, it's a terrible thing. We heard your grandson fell and broke his leg. I won't be able to be in the cavalry. Again, the grandfather replied, good or bad, I'm never always certain, but God knows. Well, the grandson came home. It seems the broken leg made him ineligible for service, at least for a time until he mended. Again, the villagers rallied back to the house and said, it's a great thing he fell off the horse, isn't it? Now he's back home with you. It's good to have him back on the farm, right? And he said, it's always good to be around my grandson. Whether things happen, good or bad, he said, I don't always know. But God knows. And I can trust God. That's all God asks from us, is to trust him, to have faith in him, to be faithful. God's promised never to leave us or forsake us, even in the worst, or the poor, or in the sickness. And he'll keep his promise to us always. Answers, they may not come in this lifetime. In fact, I think, to be honest, even if we don't get answers in this life, when we get to heaven, I'm not sure we really even remember to ask. Because all we'll think of is, there's God. There's the one who loves me. So this day, I hope you're being faithful. I hope you remember God's covenant love to you. I hope you're trying to keep covenant with him. Hang in there. Be faithful. Even if you don't understand what's taking place, God does. And he knows what he's doing. And that's a word of encouragement today from Pastor Steve.